Hello and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast, but it's not just any episode. Today, for the first time in 5 years of doing this podcast, I am using Riverside FM to record my show. This isn't a paid spot or anything. I wish it was. I need the money. I got, just side note before I introduce today's guest and get on with things. So I've been trying to improve the podcast in every way possible. I recently returned to doing clips, but as you may recall over the years, I've kind of said how laborious it can be, how much time it takes. And I'd been doing it for like 4 years and I stopped and just kind of really felt like a step in the wrong direction. And I felt bad about it, but I was like, what can I do? I just don't have the time to do it, you know? And it's always a shitty excuse when you're like, I don't have the time. But genuinely, if you've ever done a podcast or if you've never done one, it takes a lot of time to do the show, to do the research, and then, of course, do the clips, and then release it and promote it and everything, right? I don't earn any money from this. I don't know if I've ever stressed this before, but I've been paying out of pocket since I began the show. I pay for things like Zoom to record the show. I pay for audio editing software. I think it takes me up to about like 40-50 quid a month or something crazy like that. So all this time I've been doing the show, haven't earned a penny. And look, not everything's about the money, but when you're you know doing a show and producing a show and trying to make it good, and you're just a regular guy trying to earn a living, you know, I'm not rich. Like it comes out of pocket. I earn minimum wage, you know. You do what you can, right? And I thought it was a sensible time 5 years in to sort of start reviewing options. I've kind of ummed and ahed about Riverside. I've had guests on the show who've used it. I've been on other people's shows and I've seen issues, but you know, that was a few years ago. Things change. Point is, I started producing clips with Riverside and it seemed to be going well. I saw that there was an option to record. I'd kind of forgotten that I could do that, and also that because now I'm paying for the service, it's like we can go somewhere with it. So to get to the point, this is the first show with Riverside. If it goes well, then I'll keep using it. If it doesn't go well, then I won't keep using it. So yeah, there we go. Now, let's get to our main event. Let's actually get to the point of the show. Today's guest, returning guest, Nur Sharif. Now, for those who might not be familiar with him, he's a criminologist. He's been studying this for many years. And this is a topic that, well, first of all, welcome to the show, Nur. How are you doing?
Yeah, thank you very much. Glad to be here. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to have you back, man. This is something that you floated a while ago to me, this particular topic we're going to talk about today. And because it was a big one, I was not immediately like, yeah, just come on. I'm like, no, it's going to take me some time. And it's one of those where I'm not even sure if I know what I'm going to be asking, to be honest. I'm going to kind of just ride the journey with the viewers on this one. But I do have questions. I do have questions sent in by the lovely listeners of the show. So thank you so much for sending those in. Today's episode is all about transnational crime. Now, my first question to you, other than obviously you being invested in crime and criminology and everything, is where does your interest of transnational crime actually stem from? Where does it begin?
So basically, when I did my degree in criminology at the university from undergraduate, and so one of the modules was transnational crime and stuff. And surprisingly, that was one module I thought, okay, this is not my module because it's politics that new to me and stuff. And I thought it was gonna be one of my worst modules that I wasn't gonna have any interest. But when I gave it a chance, it actually turned out to be one of the most interesting things I've actually studied. And so what I did was, since then, I've got all the books on transnational crime, studied the different types of it, and it and from there it actually inspired me to actually write the stories as well.
What made it interesting for you?
I think it's like I think what made it interesting was rather than just looking at one form of crime in one country, and stuff is looking at international crimes, like different types of crimes that happen around the world. So, for example, like drug trafficking, there's terrorism, obviously, and then, and how these, and not just the victim's point of view, but how it's more about how these organized criminals operate and who actually is behind pulling the strings, and that's what makes it interesting because you don't really see more about their perspective. You always in the news you see the victim's perspective. I think this is one topic where you see the criminal's perspective of why or what's going on in the background and what's actually causing these crimes to happen, why they're going on, why they're still going.
Yeah, I think the thing that interests me the most about it is, I suppose, the leap from national to transnational crime. Because obviously, for those who don't know what it means, pretty straightforward. It's when you have crimes which kind of reach an international scale, so it'll have multiple countries involved, multiple crime networks, potentially, agencies, companies, maybe even governments involved. So it's kind of like a multifaceted thing. And I think that's kind of like my main area of interest, as maybe as a starting point here, is like, what takes a crime from national to international? What would you say are like the steps that kind of push us to that point where it starts becoming transnational crime?
I think the steps will be, so for example, because the difference between transnational, obviously domestic crimes and stuff, because domestic crimes are more like homegrown, but transnational I think is when rather you have like multiple groups and organizations helping each other. So for example, as you mentioned, like it'd be the government will be involved in this, corrupt politicians will be helping to fund this, and rather than just one person being behind this, so it's like more of like a wide world, what's called, because you got like other countries are also supporting, what's called this crime. So like that, for example, drug trafficking, they're smuggling drugs into other countries to get, to the other side where the organized criminals are there and their side of the corruption is there as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's a lot of examples of this where a government is either involved or indirectly involved. Like, I'll give you a really good starting example that I heard. There's an amazing little mini documentary on YouTube. I highly recommend everyone go out of your way to check it out. And it's basically something to the effect of, how does North Korea work? Like, how does it survive? And it's kind of a really good question, because for everyone that's ever like looked at North Korea as a country, obviously we always hear about like the militant kind of dictatorship they've got going on there, and I think it's a type of communism. I might be wrong on that, but basically it's an isolated country, and they do allow foreigners to come over, but it's heavily restricted, and there's obviously all propaganda and all that. But there's always that big question of, but how is the country still going? Like, what? Because, they don't have a lot of money. To the best of my knowledge, they do some level of business with China, but it's kind of sketchy at best. So where does that leave them? And apparently, according to this video, and again, I'll try and cliff notes it because the video will explain it far better than I can. Essentially, what the guy in the video says is that every sort of 3 to 5 years, they inevitably will pop up and start having a go at the UN and being like, give us money or we're going to bomb you. Really serious. And it kind of comes across as a bit of an empty threat, but it works. They get a bit, fidgety. They do actually start testing missiles, and then they get given money. And then they go quiet for a number of years. And all you hear are just random news stories about, like, apparently Kim Jong-un has, like, banned the use of hamburgers, cheeseburgers as a form. You have to call it something else now. Just something crazy like that. Or, like, there's state-officiated haircuts that you're allowed to have, and just, whatever. But the point remains that, they only get given, like, maybe a couple $100 million, which for a country... Yeah, obviously for us that's like lifetime's worth of money, but for a country it's not really that much. So it's like, how can you keep going on that? And supposedly, and this is I guess where the transnational crime element comes into play, is that officially the country's rules are that obviously any kind of trade is at least with foreign countries, is illegal. Like, if there is any kind of trade within the country, I mean, I can't speak to that, like how it works there, but it obviously would be self-contained. But apparently in the capital, which is Pyongyang, I believe, they have foreigners there trading. Maybe some from China, maybe some from other surrounding countries. But there are people trading, and supposedly the government is aware of this and allows it on some scale, like they monitor it. Because they know that apparently without it, they can't survive. They actually need the trade that's brought in from what is a crime. It's happening on homegrown soil, but it's like from other countries. Can you speak to that? Do you know much about the North Korean situation, or as far as it pertains to transnational crime?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting because that you mentioned North Korea, because I know that's a big country, and in terms of their corruption and stuff, it's interesting how America's quite close to North Korea as well, especially with the recent President Donald Trump and stuff. And obviously you're probably thinking, is it are there gonna be a peace or not? But I think it's because I know America always had a issue against I believe it was China and stuff. So obviously with the corruption stuff, obviously they know, if they can speak to North Korea, talk to them, give them what they want, whether that's weapons or anything, or money even, and it can help them build that connection, that communication, then to give them what they want in return, like a favor. It's interesting because like you have a lot of countries that that do that. For example, Israel's another one that's I'm presuming that helps America or even North Korea.
This is the interesting one. Like, obviously, so for those who don't know, right off the bat, asked me like, hey, can we talk politics in this? Because it's a touchy subject, and it's like, you have to talk politics in this.
Yeah.
And it's, and like, look, we're not going to be sitting here debating left or right or anything like that. I, to be honest, I couldn't care less. I'm in the middle. I will always be in the middle. It is what it is. But as it pertains to what we're talking about today, government involvement in transnational crime is an interesting thing, because there's no way that governments are not aware of the scale of crime on a transnational level that's going on within their country. However, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it can be down to like incompetence, stuff like that. But I think in maybe in America, a country like that, you've got the FBI and you've got the CIA. So you've got two agencies who are responsible for investigating this sort of crime and getting to the bottom of it. And typically, I believe the FBI is involved in the more international level stuff, because they have to kind of liaise with other countries to put together, stings or operations or whatever to catch criminals in these. And from what I understand, if you've ever seen like a crime drama or whatever, when they're like, let's say they're trying to catch like a drug lord or something, like it's never like, you can just catch him straight away. Like you've got to kind of build your evidence over time. Maybe you've got people undercover, whatever, and you've got to kind of measure the scale of it. So, like you don't capture the wrong people, or if you are capturing certain people, maybe at the lower end, how much information can we get from them? How far can we take this? How many people can we take in? And ultimately, can we destroy the empire? Yeah, and obviously sounds like Star Wars, the empire. No, because obviously typically it's going to be like involved with things like drugs, but then it's also things like human trafficking. And there's so many types of transnational crime. One of the questions actually we have from one of our listeners, shout out to Kerry, I think she asked this question.
Yep.
How many different types of transnational crime are there? Like, what are the categories?
I think, there's so many, but I can name you a few of them. So there's obviously drug trafficking, money laundering, human trafficking, terrorism, and also wildlife trafficking as well. Environmental crimes is a big issue as well, and also smuggling. And I think of all those, obviously terrorism is a big one, but I know drug trafficking is a very big common topic as well. It's actually interesting because with drug trafficking and stuff, like we were touching on, what I think what's fascinating about that topic is that they always with that they always have what's called someone to take the fall for that crime. So like a mule it's called, and stuff. And normally that person will be the most vulnerable, person because, for example, with the life, they may need the money to do the stuff to support their family, and that can make it tricky situation of who's actually really in the right or the wrong, whether it was the organized criminals, but it's always or the mule that decided to take part in it when they had no choice.
That's the tough part, isn't it? Because like not everyone is going to be. A lot of people are coerced or threatened or whatever. Yeah. You think about situations like human trafficking. I imagine there's a lot of situations of like Stockholm syndrome where they are trying to save people, but then they are then protecting their captors, maybe out of fear, maybe out of like just manipulation, whatever the case may be. So it's never going to be that black and white. I do also have listed here illicit trading of firearms, smuggling of migrants, and cybercrime. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah, cybercrime.
How many cases have you come across of transnational crime in the sphere of cybercrime to date?
Yeah. Yeah, I think cybercrime is actually it's a very interesting topic and a very, heavy one as well. Because, cybercrime is one of those topics where there's different strands of it. Because you got obviously, cyberbullying, hacking, there's obviously with hacking and stuff, there's obviously groups like, Anonymous and stuff. And with that's where obviously people, are divided. Say, oh, well, it's called ethical hacking. And so, which is, because what they're doing, the reason they call it ethical hacking is supposed to, like a proper, criminal hack is because they're doing it to expose the government, to expose, the corrupt people, and obviously the public are in favor of that, but the people on the other side, the police and the government, don't like people taking the law into their own hands, actually class these people as vigilantes. And stuff as well, and like cyber vigilantes, and there's a word actually called hacktivist, which comes under that, which means that the reason they call it hacktivist is a hacker, but they're doing it more like a vigilante perspective. So like Anonymous will be a perfect example. WikiLeaks and I guess Edward Snowden is another example. Who it depends on which perspective you actually look at it.
This is the interesting thing as well, isn't it? I mean, we've seen vigilantes painted in various forms of media over the years. My first introduction to that term, I think, was either in a video game or The Simpsons, of all places. There was an episode where Homer becomes a vigilante because they're annoyed at like the police, and like a lot of people from the town get on board with him, and they start kind of going out and they at first they're kind of solving crimes and sorting things out, and eventually it goes too far and they get in trouble, and then it kind of unveils, and I suppose the moral from that episode is like, you can't just take the law into your own hands. But then it does beg a lot of questions, doesn't it? If you have a police state that is letting you down, where people aren't trained properly, like it's problematic. I've seen a couple of clips lately in the UK, Manchester even, where I live, where there is, unfortunately, I hate to say it, incompetent policing. They have people within their ranks, and again, I'm not generalizing, but when you've got people in your ranks that like can't bust open a door, and there's like 4 or 5 of you, and it's a drug bust or something. I mean, that's pretty standard stuff. And like, don't get me wrong, I know busting a door isn't easy, but like when you've got like the tools for it and no one knows what to do, and it's like watching a sketch from the Three Stooges, it's a bit concerning, And then there's like other situations, like I saw something, I don't know where in the UK it was, but it was like a high street somewhere, and there's like at least 4 police officers trying to capture this guy who's walking around with a spade in his hand. The UK is a weird place, man. And they wouldn't go near him. They couldn't do anything. Eventually, it took some random guy who just jumped him out of nowhere and grabbed the shovel off him. And then the police swoop in and do something. And it's like, what's the problem, man? Just get in there. Like, your job is, and look, I'm not saying it's an easy job by any means, but like, this is the job you've picked. Like, it'd be like me with customer service, being like, oh, I can't talk to customers. And it's like, that's literally the job. You have to do it. Get over yourself. With policing, yeah, you're putting yourself in harm's way. That comes with the territory. I understand it can get a bit tricky as far as like what your rights are and stuff like that. But if it comes down to like protecting people, I think that you could probably waive some of those rights and be like, we need to kind of contain this as soon as possible. But I mean, it speaks to I suppose a wider problem with policing. I know, for example, on the other side, we have a lot of cut funding here in the UK, which boggles the mind. Of all things you could cut, why would you cut security for a country? I don't know about yourself, but I've never felt more unsafe in the UK than I do right now. And I know that might sound like an old man thing to say, like, "Oh, I'm so scared," but I grew up in London when knife crime was like rife, and people would like constantly try and mug me and put me at knife point and stuff. And weirdly, back then, I felt more safe, even though there was not a massively bigger police presence then. But I don't know, there just seems to be more incidents now, and it just seems like it's a bit of a free-for-all a lot of the time. And often these days, the only time I see the police is when they want to break up a protest of like peaceful people just walking down the street. They just, apparently that's the time to get involved. But I don't know. Now it's getting a bit political, so I'm going to move it swiftly on. But in that question, I didn't quite get an answer from you. Have you heard any major cybercrime cases that come to mind? Anything that stands out in particular?
I can say I can use obviously this experience and stuff as a form of, because I would say it classes as a form of cybercrime and stuff.
Which experience?
So basically, last year stuff. So another form of cybercrime I would say was a form of stalking. I mean,
Stalking?
Yeah, stalking.
Oh, were you stalked?
Yeah,
wow.
And it was it's like a form of online stalking and stuff.
Okay. And do you mind talking about that? Are you comfortable talking about that?
Yeah, I could. I don't mind talking about it. Yeah, I could.
Okay.
So,
how? This might sound like a silly question, but just kind of like paint a picture. How soon into it did you know you were being stalked? Like, what was the telltale signs? What were the telltale signs?
I think it was when, for example, after I kept blocking this individual stuff, they kept creating multiple accounts and finding my different social media accounts, and it got to an indication that obviously it's developed to that level of stalking, because it's why it became so many questions were going through my mind of why this is happening, what the reasons or motivations were behind this person doing it. And stuff, and it put that actually fear inside of me and stuff. Like, what happens if they, come, even though stopped and stuff, but what happens if they, strike again at any time and stuff? It's like now being more vigilant.
Did they threaten you in any way? Did they cause any issues in your life, or was it just surveillance?
I think it's just more about, from my experience, more about surveillance. So that's just my experience.
Did you confront them?
I did, confront them, like asking them through, what the reason was, but again, it was it didn't get really a response from the person, because I always avoid that confrontation.
So, how did you handle that situation? Did you reach out to, I don't know, who would you go to? I suppose, because I mean, stalking comes under harassment, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So if you could, I'm not saying like you could go to the police or something like that. I think it's a bit of a grey area on that one. I think if someone's sending you like death threats or something and you can prove it, then that surely is harassment. But if it's just someone's checking your stuff out, there's nothing really you can do, is there? I mean, I don't know. How did you deal with it? What was the aftermath?
I think they eventually got tired after I kept blocking all their accounts that they were creating and stuff, and I think eventually they eventually gave up after a while.
Crazy, man. I'm sorry to hear that you dealt with that. It's terrifying, stalking. It's like, what goes through someone's head that they think that's normal behaviour? But there's a lot of things in society that are not normal, really, isn't there? I mean, that's a whole podcast right there. Okay, this will be an interesting one. What is the most famous case of transnational crime?
Ooh, that's a very interesting question, and I think so the one case I will actually talk about is actually here. There was a Japanese doomsday cult called, I'm not sure if you heard of it, but called the Shuruku and stuff. No. So basically they were a terrorist organization in Japan and stuff. And and this they did obviously many attacks, but the most I think I guess that you could call it Japan's deadliest attack was I believe in 1992, and it was a Tokyo classed as a Tokyo sarin gas attack and stuff. And the reason what they want to do was so basically they obviously targeted Tokyo first, so they send about I think 4 attackers on separate subway lines. Except for what they did, they wrapped this poison gas, the sarin gas, in newspapers, and what they would do was they leave the gas there and put, stab with the umbrella. So what the whole point would be that the sarin gas will spread throughout that whole subway and stuff, and it caused obviously I think about I believe 50 people died on each subway, and also it also caused diseases as well. And the reason why that's classed as deadly attack because what the leader of the group wanted to do was Shoko Usha, who was the leader of the group and stuff. He wanted to actually use that to spread international threats as well, and he actually wanted to start actually World War III using this type of what's called weapon that he developed. And the reason what he did was before he did the Tokyo sarin gas, he also attacked politicians, political leaders of Japan and stuff to see if the gas would work. And once he was successful, he decided to go build each level up. And I believe, and what he wanted to actually do, and he said that if he had what's called succeeded, actually was successful, he actually was planning to attack the World Trade Center with the sarin gas attack, but he never actually got to that stage because they obviously got discovered before by the intelligence. So obviously the reason that he wasn't able to carry out, for example, the attack of World Trade Center was because he got caught by the intelligence service of Japan, who obviously uncovered what the motivation was and what they were doing, so prevented them to build on that. But they had the potential to build serious transnational threats.
Thanks for sharing. Okay, this is an interesting one. I mean, I feel I might know the answer, but I don't know. What does transnational crime look like in 2025?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I would say transnational 2025 would look like. So it's like I know terrorism is a perfect example of this because obviously terrorism is a big subject. And now you got before you had Al Qaeda, but now you have ISIS now who are carrying on this international threats and stuff. And it's because in 2025 we had so many different threats happening and stuff. And I know even since the start of 2020 stuff was a bit big what's called big year because we had the London stabbings happened. I believe London Bridge, that was the Ariana Grande as concert as well and stuff. And obviously those people even though that happened in the UK, but obviously they must have had connections with transnational levels of other people, other countries and stuff. And I think it is interesting because I think a perfect example of as you mentioned 2025 would be if you look at what's happening with Hamas and Israel and the Palestine conflict. And so again, it's a difficult subject because obviously you got one side you say okay for example these people class as terrorists, which is whether that's Israel Palestine depends on which perspective you look at. So if you look at that example with the Israel and Palestine conflict itself, I know that's at the moment that's like a what's called discussed topic at the moment itself because you got the different sides of it, who actually is in the wrong and right and stuff, because you got one each side blaming each other and stuff, and obviously Israel have caused a lot of international threats.
Let's move it forward and sort of talk about how transnational crime comes to be. So how much capital and resources would you sort of require to set up a transnational crime organization? Because it's a big, large-scale thing. It's going to take years to build something like that. What are we talking here? What are the requirements? What do you need?
I would say obviously funding is key element to it. Sure. So obviously the example of transnational crime I'll use in this case will be drug trafficking and stuff, because you got drug cartels and those organized criminals and stuff. And obviously it's not just them operating it, because what makes it interesting about that specific that crime and how they got to that international level is because of it's also due to corruption as well, because they pay people off, bribe people, whether it's the police force, whether it's the people at the airport if they smuggling drugs that way, and also and in return what they do, they get the resources, whether that's for example drugs from certain countries that they need to supply it.
Considering the scale of the operation and the high risk involved, why do you think criminals choose to get involved in transnational crime?
I think one reason that they get involved is obviously, for example, some of these people come from vulnerable backgrounds when they're starting off and stuff. So, for example, one of the reasons could be they need to support their families back home, or they need the money to support the people back home, obviously, and they feel they have no other choice, so they get involved in, for example, crimes like, for example, drug trading and stuff, because they know that will provide them with a good high income that will give them that lifestyle that they need and stuff. And obviously it's called, and most of these people who take part come from a place of desperation, which means that that they know that this will give them that sustainable lifestyle, but in return they have to get involved in this type of activity here.
It's a lot of risk though. I mean, is there really much reward for getting involved in something like this? I mean, because if you get caught, you're going away probably for life for stuff like, you know what I mean? Because there's so many elements involved. Like, even if you're involved in like a low end of a drug operation, there's so many things that are connected with that it might just get pinned on you. You know what I mean? Like why get involved? Would you get involved?
Yeah.
I don't know if I would.
Yeah, it's a very interesting subject as well, because I mean I can actually can I use a case study here?
Yeah, please
If it's
do.
all right. So basically, there's a documentary series I think it's on YouTube, I believe, called Locked Up Abroad, and it actually specifically deals with organized crime, transnational drug trafficking is one of those topics. And it was interesting because one of those cases, so there was a guy he's actually a British guy from the UK, but he traveled, I believe, he traveled to Peru as well. So the reason that he got involved in what's called drug trafficking, because he had a daughter and a partner at home who he needed support and stuff, and he had a criminal background as well, so he couldn't obviously it wasn't easy for him to get a job where he was. So he decided to travel to Peru and stuff, and what he did was he agreed to smuggle, I think it was cocaine and stuff. So he smuggled cocaine from Peru, I think, he was trying to do it back to the UK and stuff. But the only problem was that he didn't know that those people, the drug cartels and those people who were involved, they actually were setting him up, because they made it look like they paid the airport off so they would have searched his bags and stuff. But little did little did he know what he did was he actually body packed the drugs and stuff. So to stop them at the X-ray, we took him out, and when they found out when he went to actually prison in Peru, he didn't even have a trial or anything like that. They said, hey, you just could get this prison sentence in Peru, in the most dangerous prison there. And when he found out that he was set up by these drug cartels, he didn't understand, because he thought, he said to he thought to himself that these people treated him like family and like a brotherhood to him.
To speak to what you were talking about with regards to, let's say, UK nationals getting imprisoned in countries like Peru, or I think Thailand, it happens in quite often. Often in those instances, you hear that they remain in those prisons and there's no attempt made to get them back to the UK, or they say that they can't happen. Surely that can't be true. Surely it's like the government's not willing to take the chance for whatever reason. But why is that?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons could be due to corruption as well, because obviously
I think so, yeah.
It's an interesting subject, because just like the case study of the guy who was sentenced to Peru and stuff. Like when he got sentenced there, he was, like he said, he didn't get a trial to in the justice system, saying, oh, this is how long you could be serving your time for, and this is when then once the time's up, he could go back to the UK. But they just said, oh no, you could go to the most deadliest prison in Peru and stuff, where all these where there's even more drug dealers inside as well.
But surely that's just not on. How can we allow a UK national to be, loaded into prison in another country? Don't get me wrong, I understand if you commit a crime in another country, you should experience some repercussions, because you can't just walk around breaking the law however you feel like it. Be like, oh, I'm going home now. Like, I get it, but at the same time, like, it kind of feels like we're abandoning our people somewhat. I don't know, something about that just doesn't feel right to me. I mean, do you not owe something to your citizens? Can you really say that they're your citizens anymore? I mean, do you know what I mean? Like, a passport should mean something, like, or at least a citizenship should. Now, if you were no longer a citizen of said country, I can understand that, but do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, surely there should be an attempt made to, I don't know, like, bring someone back and maybe transfer them to one of our prisons or something like that. I mean, is that even possible?
Yeah, I think it's a quite interesting subject. I think, it's all due to, again, the government, or what the reasons are why they don't want to, bring these, their own citizens back and stuff. And I think that's where corruption plays a big role, is because you got different people paid off who are part of what's called is part of this transnational form of crime.
All right, let's talk about it then. Which agencies or which governments, or who are the most highly suspected of being massively corrupt?
I would say so. Obviously, I would say Israel probably would count the government of Israel and stuff, and obviously as well as the people that are helping Donald Trump as well. And stuff will be responsible for the corruption as well. And the reason I mentioned America, and I'll use actually again recent events, because there was a whole issue about the freedom of speech being taken away and stuff. And I think like for example, there's a comedian called Jimmy Kimmel that literally took him off the air for, I think it was for a week or so, because they didn't like the way he spoke against what's called America, what he was saying about the politicians.
How do international police departments work together to tackle transnational crime?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting subject. So I think in terms of the way that they could work together is like with more through intelligence and stuff, like operating these different groups and stuff who's involved, and obviously and then try to expose the corruption is there. And I think that's by working with other countries who are involved in those with those listed crimes and stuff. And I think if you look at drug trading and and trafficking and stuff, you have, I think I'm trying to think, you have there's a thing called the drug police and stuff. And also the reason that they're able to, for example, are able to go let's say you discover okay this person was involved with the mules stuff, is because they use what's called high intelligence to do the evidence, collect the evidence, and to see to see who's actually involved. And I think with that that's where I think, as you mentioned before, with the CIA in America comes in and stuff, because I know what they do is, and a procedure they do is, because let's say if there's been, let's say, I don't know, I'll just use it again as an example. When 9/11 happened and stuff, I think it's September 11th, and obviously they knew that obviously the person responsible was, the group responsible was Al Qaeda, but they didn't know, they wanted to go after the leader to find and the other people that were responsible for it. And the way they did that was that they obviously went to, I think, I'm trying to think, it was, so they went to, I think after they went to Afghanistan first, then they went to, I believe it was Pakistan and stuff, where they found some of the people who were involved in that group, and did the questioning there through. And that's where I guess they used what they did. They used extreme measures of torture to get what they wanted.
This feels like a I don't know if it's a silly question per se. I mean, we've spoken about governments. Does transnational crime worsen or strengthen international relations?
I think personally, from my perspective, I think it's one of the subjects where it could be like, I guess it's a divided subject, because I can, again, I'll use a case study in this, if I could bring in a example of this. So this is going back, I believe all the way to, I think, for example, when I think it was the 1970s or the 1980s, but when America, obviously, at the time, was run under the president of Jimmy Carter, who was the president of the United States at the time. And obviously, what he did was, there was international issues with at the time with Israel and Palestine and Egypt. But what he did was, he set up like a meeting with Israel and the leader of Egypt stuff to come to what's called agreement, international agreement and stuff to like come to to put aside the differences and to strengthen. And but they needed what's called other countries abroad as well, stuff to help. And I think what he did was, and it actually was successful and strengthened. Other countries came together, and Norway wasn't an example of this. That actually helped with this peace process. And obviously the impact of that is the way that strengthened that relation was that in today's society, Israel and Egypt are not in what's called that much of a conflict as what it was before, because at that time it was like a heavy a huge conflict. So he actually, what they did, those people, by working together, helped to strengthen the international relations between those countries around them.
Thanks for sharing. We're going to move it forward to the questions segment. Well, there's already been questions, but the viewer questions, listener questions. So thank you very much for sending these in, Vilma and Kerry. We'll start with Vilma's questions. Question number 1. Is it possible that some transnational crimes, like smuggling, exist because of unfair global systems rather than just bad people?
Yeah, I think I would say probably that's an interesting one, because again that goes back to the subject of like a corruption as well and stuff, because you got obviously you got the drug cartels, you got the these organized criminal stuff, but obviously then you have to look at who's actually really pulling the strings to operate these crimes, because obviously it's not just for example, it's not just the drug cartels that are doing it on their own. They needed what's called other international what's called organizations, or even help from what's called global what's called like the governments, to help them, give them what they were to, and as you mentioned, smuggling, so like weapons smuggling or trafficking stuff. Obviously, to get those weapons, they obviously got the weapons from other countries, so they could then smuggle those weapons out of their country, and obviously get them to make the money out of it.
But I still don't feel like it addresses the question. I mean, the assumption is that all criminals are bad, right?
Yeah.
And I guess what this question is trying to stress is, could it not just be because of people feel maybe trapped under systems that are not fair? Could it not be that?
Like even like for example, like the justice system I talk about, or
could be, maybe, yeah. I mean, for example, historically, I know there's been crime in certain countries where it came about as a result of like prohibition is a good example. Al Capone did like a lot of bad things, but he also did a lot of good things that people don't always talk about. Like he, for example, invented soup kitchens, I believe. Big thing that he tried to do because the government just wasn't doing anything. And, obviously like people begrudgingly accepted that because it's from a criminal. It's like, oh, but there was a lot of good things he did as well. And that came about because of, the system not taking care of its people.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting subject, because when it comes to, for example, I said the system, and like for example, whether that's the justice system and stuff. Obviously, what the question is, what role do they play in this? Whether they contribute to this, or whether they they really care about the people for example, of that country or that state where these crimes are taking place. And it's one of the, and it's one of those things is like again of whether they're contributing to this as well, because of for example, some of these people get unfair sentences when they get caught.
Question number 2: when countries work together to fight crime, who decides what justice of their laws and ideas or values are different? Did I get that right? Of their laws and values are different. Maybe like whose justice system is taken into account? Maybe whose is prioritized. If they clash on some level.
I think like with that one is, again, it's a heavy subject. So in terms like, as you mentioned, like the justice system and stuff, who actually is in charge of stuff, because obviously each country, has their own set of laws and values and stuff. So for example, not every country, for example, will agree with one another. And I think again, a perfect example, again, I could, I'll bring it, use this case study as example would be that so when they were looking for Osama, when they were looking for Osama bin Laden and the Al Qaeda group.
Question number 3: could technology like AI, i.e., deepfakes, etc., and cryptocurrency make transnational crime impossible to control in the future?
Ooh, that's a very interesting subject, because I know AI, artificial intelligence, is a big thing going on at the moment, being used for different things. And if you look at specifically for like a transnational crime and stuff, again, I would say it could do more harm than controlling it in the future and stuff, because it depends, because obviously again it could the question is, how would it control this form of crime? Because because don't forget, there's not just one form of transnational crime. You got millions of thousands of other forms of transnational crime.
Thanks for sharing. Question number 4: do you think we will ever see a world where transnational crime doesn't exist, or is it simply part of human nature?
Oh, yeah, I really like that question. I think, again, this is my perspective. I don't think there'll be a society or a time where I think transnational crime will be one of the things will always exist throughout human history and stuff, because I feel like you can't fully eliminate any form of transnational crime. I mean, you could reduce what's called the for example, you could reduce the number of people doing, for example, controlling like that aspect. But it's like, for example, terrorism. They for example, even though that 9/11 happened and they caught the people did it didn't stop the that group doing the 7/7 bombings in London. It did stop the London bombing. Granted, they did threats against even Kenya was a target as well. I think that was after 9/11 when they did I believe that was a bombing they did there. But yeah, I think that, but it's one of the things I believe will never ever fully completely be wiped out.
So we've got a couple of questions from Kerry909. Thank you very much, Kerry, for sending these in. Which country or countries have zero crime?
Oh, okay. I think again, it's an interesting one, but I think there's always, every country has a form of, the crimes happening. But I would say, again, I know people say Dubai, for example, which is in the Middle East, and some say that's meant to be one of the safest place you could go there, because the way that they've had the system there is that they control, the crime rates have been lower. And so that's why they haven't had what's called a major international threat, or they haven't had any, for example, cases of, major transnational stuff happening in that place, because the way that the government has what's called controlled, that particular, country in the Middle East.
What would you say is the biggest international crime?
I would say the biggest form of international crime would be definitely, I would say, have to say terrorism and stuff. That would be the biggest one, and also if smuggling as well as trafficking. Those are I would say the biggest forms of transnational international threats.
What are the key defining characteristics of transnational crime?
I think the key is to find out. So, for example, one of the key elements will be to see, for example, it's to operate, for example, that group of the organized crime group. For example, I'll use going back to that Japanese Doomsday group, which is who did the Tokyo sarin gas attack, because that was potentially leading up to international threats. And the way they were under, after that threat happened with the sarin gas attacks, they were under a lot of surveillance from the CIA and the government of Japan and stuff. And also, it didn't just happen straight away. They got caught. It was over years. They got caught. It wasn't until I believe 2011 where all the people responsible, even the leader, got caught and stuff. And that happened with the attack happened in 1992. And the way it did it was that it was a lot of inside jobs. They had to find out how to operate these people.
Final question for you. What are the challenges to addressing transnational crime?
I think one of the main challenges will be that, for example, I think one of the main challenges will be like how to, the reduction of how to reduce this form of crime, because I think it's like, how you control it and stuff, because don't forget, one group, like for example, when like it's like the Japanese, Doomsday group, when that, even though that those people got caught and they were, they got whatever sentence they got, and then they renamed themselves into something different when they're a new leader, and I think it didn't stop the group from doing what's called for the terrorist attacks. The group are still operating, they're still doing the crimes. And I think it's one of they sort of like make a challenge how you can't control one group, because it will always be a big challenge, because always someone else will always come, a new leader or a new group will always take over. Look at ISIS. They have a perfect example. They took over, what Al Qaeda was pretty much doing.
So as we kind of draw things to a close today, what's your final message that you'd like to leave our audience with on the subject of transnational crime?
I think one subject I would like to leave on a positive note, actually, and actually this actually links to, I guess, world peace and stuff, which is that again, I'm saying, we should have a society where we put aside the differences and just come together as human beings, and one without any war, discrimination, without any hatred, because it's like it's easier to put aside differences and just come together rather than that. But unfortunately, people want to take the unfortunately challenging route and just, build a society of, so much corruption happening.
Thank you very much, Nur, for appearing on the show and for joining us here today, for helping us do this show today on transnational crime. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was really good. Thank you.
And to all the listeners and watchers of the Christian Reeve Podcast, I hope you enjoyed this show as much as I did. If you'd like to get access to bonus podcast content and to support me with this show, you can do so at patreon.com/Christian Reeve. And until next time, be safe, be well. I'll see you in the next one.